Barron was walking down the street in the evening as his custom was. He had learned from his father the numerous benefits of a cool walk and had practiced it since he was 10. He had his favorite wristwatch on. Since he had only 30 minutes to walk around the villa, he was determined to savor every moment. It took him almost half the time to leave his father's villa, whose grand gated entrance opens to a long palm-lined driveway paved with smooth imported marble, leading to an architectural masterpiece. The villa was a massive multi-story mansion designed in modern and classical styles, with a facade of Italian marble, glass walls, and gold-accented pillars. The entrance also displayed an elaborate water fountain sculpted from pure white stone, depicting angels pouring water from golden urns. Barron felt various pairs of eyes staring at him and pulling his clothes. It was always like that, and he did not know if the attention would ever stop. He remembered one of his father's favorite quotes: "People may be observing you, not because they want to be like you, but only because they want to see you fail, so don't be deceived." He had several troubles managing the admiration from girls, but he knew many of them were gold diggers. He took an unusual path, observing the pathway, the roads, and the pedestrians. Just by the roadside, he saw a man asking for alms. The man had his hands stretched and was in a rumpled shirt and baggy jeans. Barron was about to pass him when he felt a strong force holding his ankle. As he turned, the man quickly muttered, "Please, can you give me $1? I barely have anything to eat, and I am ailing." A gush of emotion flushed Barron's face, but he held no cash. He stored all his money in accounts where every cent could be properly accounted for. Barron looked at him with pity and stared around. He had 3 options. He could neglect the old man, find a way to try to get money to give to him, or share one of the lessons he had learned from his dad to help him out of his poverty. Barron sighed and decided to spend the rest of his evening with him. What he did hours later changed both their lives in different ways. In direct contrast to people's expectation of him, Barron looked for a place to sit beside the man begging. People who recognized his status made funny comments. Some mockingly laughed, watching to see what he wanted to do. "He probably wants to tell the man to work for his father," some roughly said. Others asked if he had gone nuts enough to be sitting with a beggar. Some even dared to scream, "Trump." He chose not to respond to the side comments. He looked at the man who was desperately in need and held his hand gently. Barron could perceive the dirt and stain from his clothes and felt uneasy but decided to stay. One glance at the road, and there were tens of people already gathering with their gadgets in hand, trying to capture the moment. He was used to the unnecessary attention. He whispered to the man, "Have you eaten anything today?" The man frowned deeply and shook his head in disapproval. Barron wondered if he was to get something for him to eat before speaking with him, but somewhere in his mind he remembered one of the things his father taught him. Pain is good. Pain helps you learn and grow. It helps you pay attention to what you should have learned but haven't been paying attention to. Without pain, nothing tangible can be experienced, learned, or gained. Barron silenced his emotions and decided to do what he thought was necessary. Adjusting himself on the ledge by the wayside, Barron thought of how best to communicate what he wanted to share with the old man. He was deeply grateful to his father because he wouldn't have known so much except that his father had taught him diligently. Barron stared at the man with a grim face that gradually melted into deep concern. He started most politely, "Sir, do you know me?" The man stared at Barron and tried to study him. He looked at his shirt to see if there was any identification tag but found none. He tried to remember if his son had brought a friend like him to the house at any point, but he definitely could not remember his face. He sighed, remembering that the last time he saw his son was 5 years ago. His son was his pride and John was his name. He was the last encouragement he had to keep pushing even after his wife left him. Before Barron could continue, the old man looked straight ahead, staring into space yet communicating deep words from his heart to Barron. He lost his job for 5 months, and the bills became unbearable to his wife, Catherine. She threatened him with a divorce and he did everything he could, trying as much as possible to get something to do, all to no avail. On the first day of the 6th month, Catherine left. It wasn't long after that the old man started to feel a strong pain in his chest. He also noticed an unusual change in his skin texture. He wanted to see the doctor, but fear kept him from making inquiries. He kept searching for different opportunities since he still had John to care for. He scrambled for some daily jobs that at least afforded his son a meal per day. John was not comfortable with this. One particular day, John spoke harshly to him, talking about the things he needed and his father's inability to make ends meet. He talked so rudely, being a 20-year-old child, and after he was done, the old man threw some words to his son. He was already old enough to begin working. He was no longer a kid. Why was he always staying home, playing video games, eating, resting, and refusing to do anything because he had a father? The old man told him many of his age mates already cared for their younger ones. John was not responsible, and the old man felt it was his fault. He had allowed the young lad to become irresponsible and lazy under his watch. Catherine did not even give him the privilege of getting a younger one for John, and he wasn't ready to remarry. After he spoke those words, John gave no reply, and he believed John was thinking about those words until one day, after a stressful day's work, he came home to meet a well-wrapped letter on the table. He looked carefully and saw it was sent from John. He read it, and for the first time in 3 years, he broke down into tears. He went to his son's room and found the place swept clean. John had probably been packing daily, which he had no idea about since he always returned late into the night. It was a big struggle for him. It took 2 whole days for him to summon the courage to step out again, for he had lost the most important thing he had: family. He spent many nights replaying scenes of his wife and son, laughing and playing around. He could still see Catherine in the shadows. Sometimes, he felt compelled to search for her but reminded himself he did not send her way. She left in search of happiness. If he struggled to win her back, she would only cause him more pain. He started going out daily, working in sites, cafeterias, on the streets, and anywhere he could find a thing or two to do. After a long while of hard work, he built his savings. He discovered he still had a life. He could still be useful to his environment and all those around him. He did not have to allow his past to limit him. Little by little, he began to build relationships. He gained more friends and contributed to his environment and those around him. After 1 year, he received a job proposal from a company in his field of study, accounting. It was like God had heard his prayers. He unexpectedly got the job through one of his friends in his daily work. He went for the interview, dressed in his best, and the heavens smiled at him that day. For some reason still unknown to him, he captivated their attention with his demeanor, words, and smiles. They reached out to him the next week and gave him the job. He was thrilled. He went earlier than expected and showed an unusual commitment to the job. Many of his colleagues thought he would calm down after a while, but were shocked because he did not reduce his zeal. He kept challenging his colleagues and raising the bar. For more than a year, he worked with them until a devastating news struck him about his health. On that fateful day, he went to work with his usual zeal, working earlier and harder than many of his colleagues. As he focused on his work, he felt a very sharp, consistent pain in his chest. He ignored it at first, but it kept hitting him consistently. As he worked that day, he noticed he was weaker than before, desiring more volumes of water and needing to rest more than expected. Some of his colleagues who cared to ask met him after work. He kept saying he was fine until his immediate boss asked him to take a test the next day. Seeing him sitting with his head bent on the table during work hours was very unusual. He was known for his excellent work mindset. He went to the hospital the next day after many responses from his colleagues. Somehow, he was avoiding the clinic. He feared what he would hear. He couldn't open up to any of them that there were days he felt extraordinarily weak. There were times he experienced shortness of breath and intense bone pain. However, he had learned to suppress all his pains and appear as a man. He did not know how to talk to people about his pains. As far as he was concerned, his problems were his to deal with and he was to do it alone. He arrived at the hospital and the sight of the sick people he saw, the strong odor of drugs and medicine, and the gentle tears of people made him cringe. He did not come with any family member to care for him. He felt like the loneliest person in the world. He felt abandoned and forgotten but suppressed his pains, refusing to give in to any form of emotions. After waiting in the queue, it was his turn and he readily went to see the doctor. Immediately he was faced with the doctor, he lost consciousness. The next time he woke up, he was on a clinic bed. He strained his eyes and could taste something bitter in his mouth and a pain on his wrist and shoulders. He checked and noticed he had been injected. He did not care as much, but wanted to leave the hospital as soon as possible. Observing the environment, he was filled with pity. Almost everyone in the ward had someone with them, but they were a few like himself who had no one but themselves. He found it strangely hard to sit up. Sitting up and resting his back on the wall took a lot of effort. As he observed, he thought deeply about how valuable life could be, yet not many understood the beauty of life and good health. Not too long after he woke, a nurse came in and he quickly signaled to her, trying to get her attention. She made a face of recognition after their eyes met and she walked to him. He greeted her and she replied with a smile and not a handshake. He asked why he was still in the hospital and she explained his situation. In one sentence, he was briefed that he had metastatic cancer. When she explained all the symptoms he had been experiencing, everything looked like she was reading the book explaining his present condition. He kept nodding and approving that she was correct on all the symptoms. When he fully understood the meaning of stage 4 cancer and was told what his predicament would look like, he lost balance. He was further briefed about the weakness in his immune system in fighting the cancer and the numerous therapies he had to submit himself to. He left the clinic a day after, and a part of him knew he expected something like this would happen. He always tried to run from it. He tried to live without having to face the consequences, but somehow life did not allow him to escape with the errors of his past. He returned to work the following day after he was discharged, but noticed an unusually cold demeanor around their faces. He thought many would be excited to see him, but it was the opposite. He was summoned to his boss's office. His boss started his speech by congratulating him for a job well done and for his great traits as an employee. His boss also commended his doggedness to work and listed some qualities he had, but broke the bombshell that he would no longer be working with them. The news was a very tough one for him to bear. He lost his composure and frame. His boss further explained that his health was bad and that he needed more rest and care and should try to find one from anyone he knew. They had already begun the search for another employee after they heard of his present condition. He managed to get home before breaking into deep wounded tears. He wept like a child, and even though he felt very ashamed, he reminded himself that he was alone. The company gave him a token, and some of his colleagues sent gifts, commending him for his good impact on others. He became a consistent visitor to the hospital, sentenced to a life of restriction, medical schedule, and therapies. He felt forsaken and lost. After 3 days of pain, he mustered courage to return to his daily work. He felt his life was regressing, but found every means to believe it was just a part of the process. Every time he looked at himself, he saw failure staring back at him, but most of the time, he tried to fight his mindset, speak the right words, and remain positive, no matter what he was going through. When he got to the place of his previous daily job, they changed the manager, and the person there did not recognize him. He tried to explain that he used to work there, but someone had taken his space when he returned. He tried to see if there was any opportunity or vacancy, but there was none. After the disappointment, he summoned courage to start the search all over. However, he had one major barrier: his health. Walking on foot over stretched distances negatively affected his health, and he paid dearly for it. He went out every day trying to seek something to do. As his health kept taking a huge toll on his finances, he kept searching for something handy he could do, despite his health. Every day was warfare for him, and he lost many daily battles. With every daily stress and struggle he went through, it negatively affected his health till he came to a point where he was strictly warned to stop walking for extended distances, or it would claim his life. He went home that night from the hospital in pain. For him, it was better to die trying than to quit. It was better to keep pushing than to give up and give in. He would give everything he could, until he knew there was nothing else to give. On a certain evening, after he saw the doctor and they explained his present condition, he knew the best he could do was walk outside his porch and sit on the streets. He was banned from walking because of his backbone, lungs, and other delicate organs. He looked at Barron and touched his shoulder. For some, begging was their resort to quickly get rich. For others, begging was their last resort to eat a meal per day. Barron was completely astonished as he listened to the homeless man. His face had become wet out of pity and silent tears. He could not believe the old man begging was still him fighting for his life, fighting for something to do. It was not a man trying to be lazy, but one trying to survive. He thought everyone begging was lazy, unproductive, and a lousy spender, but he knew much better now. He understood that there were many things he did not know. He had prepared a sermon from the ones his daddy usually shared with him, only to meet a man who had applied all the principles and was still applying them. Out of pity, Barron rose and left to get something tangible so the old man could eat. He bought a full meal for the old man and sat beside him, intrigued by the lessons he had learned in practice. He was not only encouraged, he was challenged. Never had he seen a beggar as a fighter. He now knew how important it was not to judge anyone without knowing their story. Barron, still intrigued, watched the man as he ate. He asked where he was staying, and the man said, "I do not have any place to stay since I don't have the funds to keep a house." Barron was deeply touched. He did not know what his father would say about bringing a stranger home, but it was worth risking. He only needed to ensure he made a few calls. Barron leaned forward and asked the man how his teenage years looked. The homeless man smiled, finding more purpose in Barron than he had in many years. Sharing his story and teaching the little kid gave him more purpose than anything else. The man smiled and looked to the streets. "Are they your friends?" he asked, pointing Barron's focus to numerous teenagers and few adults holding their phones up to capture the moments. Barron wore a smile and did not know the best answer to give. Barron thought it wise to hide his identity from the man since he did not know him, but the people around them did not make it easy. Barron looked at the man, grinning. "They are just friends who love taking pictures and posting on social media." "Social media," the man continued, speaking from where he stopped. "It is a technology age. I quarreled with my son on this many times. He was too addicted to what his friends would say online. I always told him it never mattered," he continued, periodically eating from his meal. "What mattered was what he was willing to do with his life and how far he would go to ensure he did not end up as a failure. When I was younger, I was not the brightest, but I was one of the brightest. I topped the class sometimes, and other times I came after someone, but I was good. My drive for success is inborn, nothing external. You can't see it, can't touch it, can't quench it. It never dies." He smirked, looking into Barron's eyes. Barron smiled, listening intently to his story. "I did not also have time for teenage love. It always ends in heartbreak." The man smiled and took a deep breath. "I once fell in love, don't get me wrong, and it was a really good feeling, to be in love and be loved at the same time. But I noticed it was getting into my head and I needed to focus on my academics, so I had to let it go." He paused and studied Barron's face. He focused on his meal before continuing. "It was hard for the first 2 weeks, especially because I saw her every day and all my friends were doing it." He paused as though he was trying to remember something. Then he continued. "Not all my friends, there was one who wasn't interested in love then. I am sure he would have married by now. He was a good old friend. I remember he was no good in his academics. He wasn't a dullard either, he just did not have passion for it, that's all. I found him alone one day doing some stuff and we talked. The next day, we got talking. The next day after that, we became close friends. I taught him the things he did not know, helping him develop his grades. It is hard to bring someone to where you are, but the journey becomes bearable when the person is willing to come to where you are. We lost contact after I left the school. My dad had us moving, so we had to move, but he was one old soul I loved and cherished. He was a genius, and he had a better memory than I." The man chuckled at his joke. Barron was forced to study his character carefully. He rarely saw a smiling beggar. The man he sat with defied all his laws. He checked the time and knew he had to start returning home or he would have questions to answer, but he wanted to ask him a final question. Barron folded his arms and asked, "If you could change anything, what would it be?" The homeless man paused on his meal, smiled, and let the smile fade into the wind. He stared into the clouds, and Barron understood he was trying to dig out his deepest pain. He waited, and Barron wondered what he would say. The wind swept through the streets in restless gusts, swirling dust and discarded dirt into tiny whirlwinds before vanishing into the distance. There were the distant hum of conversations, an impatient driver's sharp honk, and the engine's rhythmic roar. The road was alive with motion, but Barron was lost in the thoughts of the homeless man beside him. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, some clutching bags against the wind's playful tugs, while those with nothing to do stayed and watched. A bus groaned to a stop, releasing a stream of passengers before lurching forward again, swallowed by the ever-moving tide of traffic. "Family," the man responded. "If I could change anything, it would be my family. My greatest hurt and regret is not my failures." We learn a tangible lesson in every failure by looking beyond the event to what we need to learn. I am proud of my failures, not ashamed of them because they were necessary lessons. He coughed so hard for a few seconds. Barron calmed him down, but it looked like the homeless man had reached the peak of his discussion. "My family was lost, broken, and destroyed. I do not know where my wife and son are, and I know they are both alive." Barron could feel the pain in his voice. It was as though the man pleaded for another chance, for mercy, to correct the wrongs he made in his home, even though Barron thought his wife chose to leave, and so did his son. Somehow the man blamed himself for it. He knew he was the only force holding John back from becoming the rascal he wanted to become, and now he was beyond his reach. Barron rubbed his shoulders gently. His phone began to buzz, and he knew who was calling. He checked the screen and was right. It wasn't a bodyguard. It was his father. Barron signaled to the man that he had to pick the call. "Hello, Dad," Barron said through the mouthpiece of the phone. "Where are you, son? Almost every live feed has you on their screens." Barron turned to see the influx of media team recording him. He took his gaze away from them. "I am just a few steps away from the house. I wanted to take a break outside." His father's reply was more sudden than he thought. "You wanted to take a break with a beggar?" Barron turned his face away from the man. "You taught me not to despise anyone, do you remember?" "Yes, I did," his father admitted, "but not this way. You are in the open with a beggar. I have told you that you are an elite. There are things you cannot do, no matter how bad you want them done." Barron heaved a deep sigh. His father continued, "I am close to where you are. I will take you back home." The call ended. Barron was displeased he had to leave this homeless man, but he had learned that not all beggars were lazy. Some just had an enormous share of ill luck, and because he was born into a family of privilege, did not make him better than anyone else. The homeless man finished the meal and gave his thanks. In less than 10 minutes, Donald Trump stepped out of his limousine. He was wearing a well-ironed black suit and white shirt. Almost everyone around was taking a flash of pictures. Barron stood up and shook the homeless man, still burdened with pity for him, but withheld by fear. The homeless man looked carefully at Donald. They exchanged glances twice, and the homeless man released a smile. "Donald?" he asked. Donald paused to observe him. He felt there was a recognition in the man's face, but couldn't tell where it was. "Sorry, do you know me?" Donald asked. The homeless man was comfortably seated when he nodded. "Do you remember our history test? The guy who took the bullet for you?" Donald squinted his eyes, but gradually released a ray of smile. "Kennedy." Donald was surprised. He went closer to get the man's hands for a shake. The homeless man smiled. "You have an interesting and humble son." "I like him. He is very much unlike mine." Barron tried to hide his face. Donald laughed and asked, "What are you doing here, partner?" The homeless man said nothing but wore smiles. Donald invited him into the car. Before he entered, he replied, "If you want to know anything about my story, ask your son. He will tell you." He looked at Barron and smiled again. "You remember the guy I said I helped in school who I brought to my level?" Barron nodded. The homeless man looked at him, then to Donald, and back to Barron. He is about to also lift me to his level. With that, they left. What do you think of Barron's gesture toward this old beggar who turned out to be his father's long-lost friend? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this video taught you something tangible, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.